be wearing a sweater in this video, but it is basically 90 degrees outside. So we're gonna pretend it feels like fall today. Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel, and welcome to my channel if you are new here. Hi, my name is Liz, and today we are going to be discussing my August wrap up. For the month of August, I was able to get through 11 books. Some of these books were highly anticipated, some of them were really good and very enjoyable, and some were sort of a letdown and a flop. I have kind of a mixture and I really want to talk about them. So let's get into the video. The first book that I read in the month of August was Ready or Not by Kara Bastone. I have no clue if I said that right, but I'm gonna just go with it. This is a story about an unplanned pregnancy between this girl who had a one-night stand with a bartender. At the time, she and her best friend are kind of on the rocks a little bit because her best friend is trying to get pregnant, so it does put a little strain on their friendship. Meanwhile, she and her best friend's brother kind of strike up a friendship, and he is very supportive throughout this whole pregnancy process. So the whole story is just about this unplanned pregnancy and leading up to the birth. I read Out on a Limb a little earlier I think was that last month, and I loved that book, so I was very excited about this book. It kind of gave me fall vibes just from the cover, like spring or fall, changing seasons, I don't know. However, I will say it did not live up to what I was expecting, especially after reading Out on a Limb. I ended up giving this book 3.75 stars, which is still really good. It was a very cute, lighthearted book, very fun, very quirky dialogue. I will say the one thing that kind of annoyed me throughout this story was there was a lot of stuttered dialogue. It seemed like the characters were constantly stuttering when they were having a conversation. It was just like, spit it out already, like get to the point. But besides that, I still did enjoy the story. It was very cute, very lighthearted book. I would definitely recommend this for someone who wants a palate cleanser. Next up, we have The Housemaid is Watching by Freida McFadden. This is the third book in the Housemaid trilogy. I did read the first and second book and I loved them. I gave the first book 5 stars, and the second book I think I gave like 4.5, somewhere in there. This one I feel like just did not live up to the hype, which I'm sad to say. I ended up giving this book 3.5 stars, which is still very good. I would still recommend this to anybody who has started that trilogy and is wanting to continue with your characters. I will say the one big difference about this book, there is a big time jump, so it is probably 10 years after the second book, and our main characters have children together, and it's just following their life where they move into a new house and dealing with nosy neighbors and all of that. There were still cliffhangers. It was very fast paced. Each chapter was very short, and it felt like it had cliffhangers scattered throughout, like at the end of every chapter. I did kind of guess the ending, which was a little bit of a letdown. I was hoping for a little bit more, but it was still very good, still very fun. True to Freida McFadden fashion, she still gives you a good little plot twist, even at the very end. Next up, we have Girl Abroad by Elle Kennedy. I was very excited about this book. However, I'm sad to say it just did not live up to what I was expecting. I have read all of the off-campus books by Elle Kennedy, all of her hockey romances. I feel like I've read them, and so this was a new take, especially for her. It is about our main character, who is the daughter of a rock star, and she decides to go to school abroad, and when she gets there, the 3 roommates who she thought were girls are actually 3 guys. In my head, when I was starting this book, I definitely thought it was gonna be like New Girl, which is one of my favorite TV shows. It was not very much like that. I feel like from the get-go, there were just so many different character dynamics. There were so many plot lines as well, and it was just very hard to follow. I felt kind of bored in certain areas, and I just don't know. I didn't feel like the story flowed. Also, it had a few tropes in it that I did not enjoy. I ended up giving this book 2 stars. It does deal with like a love triangle, which usually I don't like love triangles unless it's done in a very specific way. And there was also cheating going on, which I will never support cheating. It made me hate our main character a lot. It's just hard to read a story where you don't like your main character. I also feel like I had to skim a good portion of this book just because I was trying to finish it and get through it, and I never want to feel that way when I'm reading a book. That's why it's a 2 stars. I'm sad to say it just was not for me. Next up, we have a few books that I actually read in my 24-hour reading vlog that I did, and the first one was Dragon Den by Chris Dean. The only reason why I bought this book and started this book was because it's literally about dragons, and I was looking for a story where our main character and the dragons have a connection to where they can communicate with each other, because I really enjoyed that in Fourth Wing. I really loved the dragons, and I will say this book definitely had that. It is a shorter fantasy, and it is a standalone. I don't know if it's a standalone. I know that this is the only book as of right now. It is about our main character Marcus, who is trying to become a a dragon rider. At the very beginning of the story, you follow him as he is trying to bond with a dragon. However, he fails epically. If these students cannot bond with a dragon, then they have to leave the Dragon Academy. They're not allowed to continue. There is another dragon that his bonded dragon rider died in a mission that went wrong. And so our commanding officer kind of strikes up a deal with our main character and says, if you finish this mission, then you can bond with this dragon and remain at the academy. So our whole story is just him trying to solve this mission, while at the same time he is also dealing with a romance of sorts. It's kind of already written in, like when you start the story, he already is in love with this other dragon rider. And I don't know if I really enjoyed that. I feel like the story, it focused a lot on the romance and not so much on the actual mission he was trying to accomplish. And also I feel like the ending just got a little bit fuzzy. Like it just didn't feel like the story was fully fleshed out. Like there was a lot happening and it was like, how did we get to this point? I ended up giving it 3 stars. It was still very fun, a very fast-paced read. It's not a story that I'm going to be thinking about very much in the future, but I will say I think this is a really good read for someone who is kind of dipping their toe into fantasy or into dragons in their fantasy books. This was definitely very easy to understand. It's in present day Seattle. Think Seattle with dragons. Next up, we have The Love of My Afterlife by Kirsty Greenwood. I also read this during my 24-hour reading vlog. This story follows our main character who at the very beginning, she chokes on a burger and dies and ends up in this kind of waiting room area. However, while she's there, she runs into this guy. They have instant chemistry and she feels like he's the love of her life. And there's this big mix up and he gets sent back to Earth. So she strikes up a deal with one of the workers at this waiting room and asks her to send her back. And she has 10 days to track down this guy and have him kiss her. And if she does, then she can remain among the living. This story was very, very fun. I will say that was the main thing I enjoyed about the story, was just the whole premise. And I thought it was very cute. The characters were very fun. Our main character, she was very funny in general. I ended up giving this book 3.5 stars. I don't know why it wasn't a higher rating than that. To me, it just kind of fell a little flat, but it was still very fun. I haven't really thought about this book much since I finished it, so I think that kind of speaks to how I felt about it, but I still would recommend this book to someone who wants just a very cute, cheesy romance. I still had a good time while I was reading it. It's just not my favorite romance I've ever read. Next up, we have To Kill a Kingdom by Alexandra Christo. This is another book that I read in the 24-hour reading vlog, and it's basically a Little Mermaid retelling, but a darker take on that. Our main character, she is a siren princess. She gets punished because she accidentally kills one of her own. She has to steal the heart of the prince of our main kingdom that our story kind of follows. So she does get turned into human, just like in The Little Mermaid, and she does kind of wash up on this ship. The one thing that I really enjoyed about the story, though, is that it felt like it was a far enough away story from The Little Mermaid that I had enough differences that it didn't feel very repetitive. And what I liked was that our main guy character, he is more of a pirate than a prince. So I really enjoyed that whole storyline. They end up having to go on a quest together. I feel like the romance was rushed a little bit at the very end. It didn't feel like our characters had enough scenes together or enough time talking to each other to get to know each other to eventually form a love connection. I ended up giving this 3.75 stars. I would still totally recommend it because it is a standalone. It is a fun fantasy world, and I really liked the quest that they were on, and I think it would be fun for anybody else who wants just a very fast-paced fantasy read. Next up, we have Next of Kin by Hannah Bonham Young. This is the same author of Out on a Limb, which I loved that book last month, so I really wanted to read another book by the same author. Our story follows our main character who just finds out that she has a sibling. Her birth mother had a baby, and she is trying to get custody of her younger sister. Our main character, she has been in and out of foster care growing up. She was eventually adopted, so she's been through this whole routine, and she really wants to be there for her younger sibling. However, she does not have enough income in order to support her younger sister, so she ends up moving in with our guy main character who is also trying to get custody of his teenage brother. They both have the same goal, is they are living together, but they are trying to get custody of their siblings. And I really enjoyed that part. I enjoyed the found familyness of this story. I ended up giving this 3.5 stars. I will say I still enjoyed the story. I just feel like it was very rushed. It was very fast. The romance, I feel like, happened very quickly, and I don't really like that. To me, it's not very realistic, especially whenever you have all this other stuff going on with your family life that you're trying to figure out. But I still really enjoyed the found family. I loved the scenes where the siblings were all together and interacting and learning how to co-parent and coexist in an apartment together. And the last book that I read in my 24-hour reading vlog was Sister Maiden Monster by Lucy Snyder. This story I picked up very randomly at the end of that video. I only had a couple hours left of my 24 hours. I didn't know what I was in the mood for, and this is a book that I had on my fall TBR last year, and I never got around to it, but I just figured why not? It's almost fall, so why not try to dip my toe back into the fall, like, cozier reads? I will say I did not not realize that this story was horror until after I was like almost halfway through it, which is honestly my own fault. I did not do my research, but I think that this book kind of solidified in my brain that the horror genre is not for me. I ended up giving this book 2 stars. It follows this post-apocalyptic world. It's like post-COVID, where there is this virus that's going around and people get turned into different types. So type A is you just get sick and then you're fine. That's type 1. Type 2, you end up getting very, very sick and you basically become a vampire. You crave human blood. And type 3, you crave human brains. So you're basically a zombie. It was just a very weird read. It follows 3 different women who are all different types and they're all being affected by this virus in different ways, but they all do kind of interconnect as you're going along. The ending, honestly, it just felt like a fever dream while I was reading this book. I had no clue what I was reading, and very gory. So if you enjoy very gross and descriptive books that have to do with the human anatomy, then this would be a book for you. Sadly, I do not think that this falls under what I would typically pick up. Next up, after that whole book, I needed something fun and lighthearted and one that I knew that I would enjoy. So I decided to pick up The Fiancé Dilemma by Elena Armas. This is the same author of The Spanish Love Deception. There's The American Roommate Experiment, and there's The Long Game. I read The Long Game last fall and I think I gave it 5 stars. I loved that romance book. I thought it was so good. I loved the world you were in. It was definitely a small town vibe. It was so fun. The characters were adorable. The romance was amazing. Everything about it I loved. So I wanted to pick up this book because it is set in the exact same world. It follows our main character, who is the mayor of this town that our main character in The Long Game goes to. So if you've read The Long Game, you know who I'm talking about. She is known for breaking off engagements. She's actually been engaged, I think, 4 times. She finds out that her biological father is this very famous person. The media kind of focuses on her and she becomes like a PR nightmare. Whenever her sister's friend shows up into town, she pretends that she is engaged to him. So that's why it's The Fiancé Dilemma. The whole book is just them pretending to be engaged. And I will say at the beginning, it was a little slow getting into it, but after I got like probably 60 or 70 pages in, I was hooked. I was laughing, I was giggling, and I really, really enjoyed the world that we were in and getting to see past characters from The Long Game. I ended up giving this 4.25 stars, so it wasn't as good as The Long Game, but it was a very, very close second. It was so good. I highly recommend this to anybody who has read any of those books. Next up, we have The Jigsaw Man by Nadine Matheson. I actually listened to this on audiobook for the entirety of this book. I'm glad I did. It honestly felt like I was listening to a crime junkie, like a podcast. If you are interested in any of that and trying to solve serial killer mysteries, this is the book for you. It follows our main character, who is a detective, and she is trying to solve a series of murders that basically look like a copycat of a serial killer who was arrested, that she was on his case years prior to that, and she still has a lot of like trauma and PTSD from that case. However, she decides to take on this case and try to track down this copycat. Basically, it's a serial killer who is chopping up people's bodies and scattering it all around London. It definitely felt like a Criminal Minds episode, which I really, really loved. I ended up giving this book 3.5 stars. I will say it was a little bit hard to get into. Midway, it kind of lost me a little bit. Towards the end, it definitely sucks you in. Once you're kind of solving all the pieces and kind of fitting it all together, it definitely hooked me after that, and I really, really enjoyed the ending of this book. And the last book that I read this month was The Curse of Sins by Kate Dramis. I read The Curse of Saints earlier this year and I gave it 5 stars. I absolutely loved this fantasy world, and I'm really glad that I picked up this one. It is a thicker book. Like, this was over 600 pages, so that was a little intimidating. However, this fantasy world, it sucks you in. It's a world where all these people, there are humans, but there's also people who have different powers that they get from their gods and goddesses. Our main character, she is the queen's third in command, and she is the queen's assassin. There's this whole prophecy where a second saint will arise and kind of fix the world's greatest wrong or something like that, and she all of a sudden has these powers. Our main character, she is so strong, and it definitely gave me Throne of Glass vibes. Like, main character from Throne of Glass felt very similar to this girl. I ended up rating this book 4.25 stars. The beginning of the book was a little hard to get into. However, the last half of this book, I was sucked in. It was just like constant reading. I could not get enough. I highly recommend this to anybody who is wanting to start a new fantasy world. This is going to be a trilogy. The 3rd book, I think, comes out next year. It is in the works, but I really hope it's sooner rather than later, because this one definitely leaves you in a bad place when you're finished with it. And that is it for today's video. I hope you guys enjoyed. Hopefully this gave you some good book recommendations, or just, you know, showed you what I was up to this last month of August. honest. I will say I'm very, very excited for the month of September because I feel like I have a lot of books that I've been wanting to get to and also getting to start my fall TBR. I'm just ready for it to be fall. I know I'm literally in a sweater right now and it is like 90 degrees outside, but I'm just gonna start manifesting fall. It's gonna be fall. It's gonna feel like fall very, very soon and I cannot wait. Once again, thank you guys so much for watching and I will see you guys in my next video. Happy reading. Bye.